So microphone was turned off, I guess. So very warm welcome from my side. I'm Stefan Schaffer from the German Research Center for Artificial Intelligence, and I'm very happy that I'm able to talk to you about our project, the chatbot in the museum. And yeah, so actually it's already starting. We are at slide, I don't know. Let's go to the beginning. Yeah, okay. So the presentation is called "Why is the dog green?" And I hope that I will be able to answer that question for you at the end of my presentation. But our whole work goes about using chatbot interfaces to find out what museum visitors really want to know. And so our research is about not about doing chatbots like static dialogue agents, but what we are using is large language models to answer questions in the museum. And how we want to do that, you will see in my further slides here. So I will first talk about our idea a little bit. I will present our implementation, not in detail, but a nice overview. And I will talk about our first insights of the evaluation that just ended a few days ago in the Städel Museum in Frankfurt, Germany. So, the issue that often museum visitors have is that sometimes I don't want to be told anything, I just want to look. But then I get questions. And this is what we are focusing on. So we had the idea to conduct this research project called Chatbot in the Museum, which is funded by the BMBF, the German Research Ministry, and it is conducted by Linan Medien, which is our project partner, and the DFKI, which is me. The project will end at the end of May this year, so we are close to final here. So, what is it all about? So, we had to select a number of objects from the Städel Museum to build that demonstrator. And so we selected these objects that you can see here. And so if you think of yourself, what questions would come in your mind if you see these pictures? So the big question here is, so what kind of questions would users ask if they are standing in front of these objects? So, and here it comes to the sort of questions that are, so to say, available out there. That means there could, for example, be questions like, when was the picture painted, which is maybe quite easy to answer because it is a factual question. But other questions like, what is the story behind the picture, are not so easy to answer because they are rather open. So let's come to the factual questions first. And these, in our case, could be comparably easily be answered by looking into the museum database. So usually visitors have certain intentions. That does mean that the intent, so the intention of the user, if the user wants to know who painted the picture, for example, could be answered by the museum database if we can detect this intention. So that means that we need a kind of mapping between the intents that have to be detected, so the user's questions, and the structured data in our museum database. So let's have a short look into how our application looks like. Unfortunately, our system is in German only, but you will also get a translation. So the system could, for example, also be used before the visit in the museum. So regarding this picture, an interesting question could be asked by the system now, could be asked to the system now.
Wie groß ist dieses Bild in Wirklichkeit?
Die Größe des Bildes ist 280,0 mal 450,0 Zentimeter.
So if you're looking, so maybe for the visitors on site, for the participants, actually I don't know how big this picture painting is being presented. So, but on my screen it's comparably small, a few centimeters. So actually I do not know how big this picture is in reality. So this question might actually be relevant for visitors who are planning their visit, for example. So, of course, if you're standing in front of the object, you might have other questions that come into your mind where we will come to afterwards. So, of course, we also focus on the part of the open questions that users could have. And here, our main information source were the texts from the audio guides of the museum. The good thing is that Linan Medien, our partner here, was the company who was creating all these audio guides and the text information about the exhibits, and therefore we had there also the experts who were knowing everything about these texts. What we are using here is a large language model, a natural language understanding model called BERT, and BERT is able to find answers in unstructured data. So this is a big difference to the data that we had before. This is very different to if you have a database. So in that case, we have text information inside a database actually about the exhibit. However, this text is not structured. It is just all the written text about the exhibit. So actually, this model is able to answer open questions and fact questions because, of course, also facts about the object can be part of the textual information here. What we found out is that additional annotations about the content type can improve the accuracy of such a large language model. And what that means, you will find out in the next slides. So what we had to do first, before we could create our models and before we could also create these content types, is to find out, to make some research about what the users are actually asking. And therefore, we built up a website for collecting questions, and we used these exhibits that you already saw from the Städel Museum, and we integrated them in this website. And here you can see one example picture. And then our contributors were able to ask questions about the museum. But actually at this stage, they did not receive answers because we just used this information to see what are the users asking. We collected over 2,000 questions that were then manually put into categories by ourselves. And so this was also put into a publication at the Arts IT conference, and it used an approach from a different publication, and we came up that these content types that they used should be increased by a few other content types so that the data gets better distributed over the content types. The resulting content types are these that you can see here. And for example, for this picture here, I can show you another demo. So here, visitors, one of the visitors, in this case is myself, are standing in front of the object inside the museum. And here, it's of course not that interesting to ask how big the picture is, because you can actually have a nice impression about how big the picture is. But if we use our system, other questions could come into our minds.
Wer sind die Personen auf dem Bild?
Claude Monet zeigt seine spätere Ehefrau Camille zusammen mit dem gemeinsamen Sohn Jean am Tisch. Am Fenster lehnt eine Besucherin und dahinter schließt eine Bedienstete den Wäscheschrank. Nicht zu sehen ist Monet selbst. Für ihn ist der Platz vorne mit der bereitliegenden Zeitung, dem Le Figaro, reserviert.
And what you can see, or better to say here in this example, if you are able to understand German, is that these end-to-end approaches, of course, also have their issues. One issue, for example, is names. Names is a very, very hard domain, for example, also for the speech synthesis. And in this case, the name of the wife, called Camille, was not correctly pronounced by the text-to-speech. And actually, so for me as a language researcher, this is quite obvious. And actually, for many people who are working in the museum area, this was a critical point. So let's go further. To look a little bit into the implementation of the system. So I already mentioned we use the audio guide text. We also use additional catalog text to answer additional questions where we knew, okay, according to our question collection that we did, we could see for some questions we do not have the answers inside our guide texts. And for these questions that we already saw, we could of course create answers based on additional information and create new text, as you can read out here. So, and of course we also use, as you already saw, the digital database. The Q&A matching was more or less done by annotating the questions. That means putting the questions into categories and also annotating the answers so that we can create a match between the questions and the answers. And then we can use an NLU engine called RASA to create a matching between these questions and answers. And here you get a short insight about our overall NLP stack. So at first we use these RASA Q&A matching, and then we come more or less to the heart of the whole thing, which is this NLU model BERT that I already mentioned, that does not really need labeled information, annotated information, but we use these additional content types here that we were finding out in our publication at ArtsIT. And then as a fallback, we also use a cosine similarity-based matching so to be able to create the best matching output answer. So here are a few screenshots of the system. We have introduction text for the users. We have this object selection inside the application, of course. Then we have the chat dialog. We have a preview of the selected object so that the user can know which object is selected at the moment. Then we are also able to display where in the exhibition the object is using a map. And there are, of course, different menus for further information. And the most important thing here, you can use text or voice to input your questions about the exhibits. About the chat dialog, we have in yellow, on the right-hand side, the user inputs. We have the answers at the left, the bot answers, and you can enter your questions below in this text box. On the top, we have some settings that I will not show now here. So, some insights into the evaluation of the system. We did a user test in the Städel Museum, and the task of the users was to ask at least one question about the object, and this they should do for at least 6 different objects. And then after their visit, they had to fill out a questionnaire about the user experience, and they could give some open feedback And additionally, we also collected many interactions during the visit. So what insights did we gather? It were 135 participants who contributed here. In average, over 23 questions were asked by each participant. That means we have another new question data set of over 2,700 questions now. And we did not annotate that, by the way. So this is interesting additional data. So I can show you by now preliminary results, two significant results. Number one is about the audio guide usage, which might be interesting, because what we find out is that people who rarely or never use audio guides in the museum rate the system significantly better than people who often or always use audio guides. So, and what we mean, what this suggests is that the chatbot is actually a meaningful supplement for people who would not choose an audio guide for the exhibition. Another important result is about the quality of voice output. I already mentioned that there are many people who rated the voice quality of the system poorly. However, these people who rated poorly still rated the attractiveness of the system significantly better than people who rated the voice quality well. So what does that tell us? So in our opinion, this is a suggestion for that the TTS, the text-to-speech, even if it is annoying, the quality of the system of the speech synthesis is not the deciding factor for rating the effectiveness, the overall attractiveness of such a system. And then we also have some qualitative feedback gathered. And for example, users said, it is nice, you can ask any question that comes into your head directly. You also dare to ask simpler questions, which you might, for example, not ask if you are in a group guided by a human guide. Another finding was, if it doesn't have a correct answer to my question, there is still possibly interesting information about the picture. So this is maybe something that a human guide would also do, telling something different if it does not know the real answer about the question. Of course, there were also negative answers. For example, stuff like the bot would need to be filled with more answers to more information to answer my questions better. And also feedback, I would have liked an introduction to come and not to ask the questions at the beginning, but as continuing questions. Yeah, so that means from the user experience point of view, our system can definitely be improved. So let's have a little outlook. We plan to further development this research demonstrator into a marketable project, and we think that the chatbot is an important tool in future museums for having more participation of the users and the visitors. And the nice thing is that we already have some funding for a follow-up project starting this October this year. So I'm sorry, I did not answer the question by now. This is my last slide. And why is the dog green?
Warum ist der Hund grün?
Ursi, die sibirische Schäferhündin Franz Marx, hatte sehr helles Fell. Aber Franz Mark interessiert sich für den Eigenwert der Farbe und setzt das in zahlreichen Tierdarstellungen um. Er malte auch blaue Pferde und gelbe Kühe. Dahinter steht eine pantheistische Vorstellung, in der das Tier im Einklang mit der Natur die Idee eines ursprünglichen und reinen Lebens verkörpert.
So maybe this answers also the question for you. I don't know. I thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to receive maybe one or two questions as long if we have time.
Thank you. Right, there is a question in the audience here. We'll just have to wait until a microphone reaches. Actually, we have a couple of questions. Oh, go ahead.
I can't see you if you don't. Should I get it with you?
Yeah, thank you, Stefan, very much for these very interesting projects. I'm interested in the follow-up. So let's see, I really like this idea that you have all of the information about the exhibits and etc., documents from the archive or whatever in the museum, and that you go through a bot that helps you filter what you want to know. Now, here's my brilliant idea that I'm hoping maybe you can tell me if it's possible. Do you imagine actually visitor? I'll tell you the long story. My mother just turned 70 and she's a doctor. And so I wanted to take her to a museum, the Rijksmuseum, and have a tour, a guided tour about all of the paintings that had to do with medicine or sicknesses or, all of these things. There's not enough staff to give this specialized tour, but the data is there. It's just that they couldn't find the person who will have the time to come for my mother, etc., etc. Would you imagine a bot that could personalize a guided tour, perhaps not with all topics, but perhaps with, let's start with 5 topics: music, science, birds, or something like that. Do you see this in your follow-up project at all?
So it somehow sounds like as if you wrote our project proposal. So because actually this is a part of our follow-up project idea. So yes, to answer your question briefly, I think this is possible, and this will be a part of our follow-up project, as I said. So that means for the follow-up project, we planned that at the beginning, the users of the conversational systems should be able to tell something about their personal interest, yeah, and then the system should be able to browse through the contents and the objects that are available and to detect these parts of information that are relevant to the interests of the users. And that means that we will have, so to say, dynamically personalized generated tours for the users. And our aim would be that we also have something like a chatbot guide, because if we again think of these text snippets that we have from the existing object descriptions, for example, we have all these snippets there, yeah? And these have to be interconnected again between each other. And that means that we plan to create something like a chatbot that can build a bridge from one information snippet to the other information snippet.
Okay, we have another question coming from the audience here, and then we have a couple coming online as well.
Maybe I missed the part where you mentioned it, but do you actually, one of the methods of conversation is you actually put in the text, but do you also speak? Because somewhere in the presentation, we could actually hear your voice asking the question. So I was wondering if you can also use the speech version, and if have you encountered any problems with the system understanding what you're asking? Because I know from another system that this is a problem, the bot recognizing your voice and your intonation and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so very important question, I think. So actually, our system offers 2 input modality. I would say the primary mode is speech. Yeah, so that means you can enter your questions using speech, and alternatively, of course, it could be that in the museal context, from time to time, you don't want to ask your questions loud, speak it out loud, because there are maybe other visitors, and in this case, you can also type your questions using the virtual keyboard in your smartphone. Yes, the other part of your questions, of course, this part is the automatic speech recognition, yeah, that puts the audio into text. And of course, this is the first error source. Yeah. So if we have, for example, people speaking, the system is only for German by now. But if we have people speaking German dialects or maybe with an accent, we can of course have problems in finding the correct text that matches your audio, so to say. This is what I already mentioned regarding the names, also an often known issue. However, these models already work quite well for these languages where we have many data. For languages where we do not have that much data by now, the speech recognition does not work that well. Still.
If your speech-to-text is German only, but the natural language processing units, are these also German-specific, or they could be used on another language as well, on different language?
Yeah, also a good question. So what I said is that we are using the BERT NLU model, and this is actually not completely correct because BERT is an English-speaking model, yeah, or a model for the English language. And during our project, at the beginning, we actually used a translation from German into English to use the BERT in English, and then a back translation of the answer from English into German, which is again, of course, a new error source. But during our project, the German version for BERT, Gelectra, came up, and then we of course used that model. But the NLU is actually also language specific at the moment. And for another language, we have to plug in another NLU model.
Understood. You already mentioned that some user feedback you had was that they may want an introduction to kind of start a conversation with the bots. So what happens if they don't have a question in mind, or they can't, they're afraid to ask? Is there a way of starting a conversation with them from the chatbot side?
Yeah, we don't have a real conversation ability at the moment. So this is at the one hand side because of our research questions, so to say, because we actually wanted to know how good these large language models at the moment work in the museal context. And if we would then start with a conversation, we would give them, of course, an additional information where they may base their question on. And this is not really what we wanted. However, our qualitative results showed that from the user experience point of view, it could be, of course, much better if we, for example, start the conversation with a fun fact, and then the further questions, and then based on such a fact, of course, it could be that questions come into the mind of the users. So if the users really had no idea, they have the possibility to open an object menu. I did not show this menu in the presentation, but inside the option menu, there are at least the three most frequently asked questions for each exhibit. And actually, there are also the audio guide texts available.
And what happens if the chatbot doesn't know the answer to my question? Do I get directed to a real human person? Or it's just is left unanswered?
Yeah. So actually, at the moment, it is the case that usually in most cases, you always get an answer. And that means that the answer is wrong or doesn't make sense from time to time. I mean, what you have to know is that these large language models are statistical machines still, yeah, and that means always some answer or some part of our context, our object description has the highest probability, which will be the output. Yeah, and so in that case, the answers sometimes do not make sense, and in these cases, the users are able to give a feedback using a thumbs down button. They also can give a thumbs up. However, so usually they more often use the thumbs down if they do not like the answer. But the good thing is, if we have this information, so low confidence on the one hand side, if we have very low confidence, it is obvious that we should look into the answers if they were good. If not, maybe we have to add some better answer material. And as a second source, of course, the direct user feedback, the thumbs down, is the information that the user was not satisfied here. And that means in this interaction, we had a problem and we have to improve the system here.
Thank you very much, Stefan. This is all we had time for for this paper. Thank you.